Okay, so welcome to the, I don't remember how many times we have had these, but anyway, to Accredited Network webinar. So about the network, just a couple of words. We founded it, like I said, 2 years ago, and it's an informal network for research and practitioners interested in critical perspectives in education and technology. So we've been organizing these webinars, and we also have a reading circle that we've been trying to launch, but it seems people are so busy nowadays, even academics, that it's really difficult to get people to read books. Anyway, but today we have a topic with the title Technology, the Blind Spot of Political Discourse and Environmental Education. So this is sort of, I wouldn't say these are two different things, but we have two presenters today who are discussing both of these in a way from their perspectives. So we have Pasi Takkinen from Tampere University and Niklas Toivakainen from University of Helsinki. So, but instead of me blabbering, I'm just going to give the floor to Niklas first. And like Pekka said, we're going to have the discussion and the questions later, but you can put them on the chat. So if you want, and to the presenters, if you want to present, say more about yourself, feel free to do so. I'm freezing today, so my mind is also like a bit blurred. So anyway, the floor is yours, Niklas.
All right, thanks a lot. Well, I don't have anything special to add about myself, so I'm going to speak on the topic instead more. So the main theme, well, I can say this much: I've been working on the philosophy of technology for, well, I gather some 10 years now already. I have had some kind of special issue in, or special interest in the issue of artificial intelligence and robotics, especially the way in which they, let's say, infiltrate themselves, become part of our social reality and the social organization of our society, but also in terms of political economy and so on. And then as a part of that, I've become more interested in the very notion of technology in itself. And well, more particularly, I gather that I've been working quite much with the question also of kind of understanding the relation between technology and science, empirical science, maybe more particularly, but I gather that modern science in general, and I gather many of you have heard the term techno-science or something of that sort, as a kind of a maybe form of the or a kind of paradigmatic form of modern science, let's say post 16th century, 17th century science. No, I won't talk that much about that today. I'll say a few things about that. What I want to discuss today is more the issue of why and how technology as a very as a large overarching phenomenon or a concept maybe, but I gather more importantly as a practice, social practice, as also as a form of our social organization, how that first of all, why that, I mean, I get that everybody kind of easily understands how dominant and how present technology, modern forms of technology specifically, and for us maybe today digital technology is part of our everyday life, how and technology is somehow there, it shapes us quite irresistibly, and at the same time, at least this is my opinion, that there is a very strong lack or an inability to thematize, to make technology as this kind of a overarching practice, as thematize it politically, that is to say, to make it a serious political discussion or part of the political discourse. So one of my kind of claims would be that technology is a certain focal point of irrationality in our modern society, modern civilization. And the question I'll try to kind of say something about is why this is, and also why critical voices, critical reflection, critical rational reflection, and also critical political discourse is subdued. I mean, why is it lacking to the extent that I would like it to exist? Now, and I'm also interested quite much in the, let's call it, existential reasons, maybe the underpinning reasons or existential reasons that inform, as it were, the lack of political seriousness in terms of on discourse of technology. Now, as a kind of reference point, I think we could say that, well, we have economy as a quite defining feature of how our political discourse is divided. I mean, the classical divide between left and right is, of course, in a very formative sense concerned with political economy in many ways. Of course, I mean, issues that relate to those, but economic relations are one of the key centers in which political discourse is formed. So, of course, and we all know that economy, especially in the capitalist social structures, well, not only in the capitalist, but let's say, to use this somewhat vague term, the post-feudal society economy is, of course, a very defining way of how social relations are organized. I mean, a kind of organizing principle in many ways. But anyway, so that's one thing, and economy is one of the most serious political themes. And so why is technology not that? And here the difficulty is to see, I mean, on the one hand, well, I would say that technology shapes us at least to the same extent as economical relations, political economy shapes our social organization, social relations. But on the other hand, I would also say that technology is a phenomenon which is maybe even more difficult to thematize politically. So I say this as a kind of with a certain empathy towards, also, or kind of understanding, or maybe compassion, even in relation to why technology isn't discussed seriously enough. But anyway, I think that doesn't undermine the point, which I think is that it really is a blind spot of political discourse. So I'll try to say something about that now. So these things that I'll say now, I'll pick up. We have there's a chapter in a book which I myself and my colleague Thomas Wahlgren we co-authored it, or I co-authored it with him. And I'll take from there. Our analysis is that there is that the mechanisms for avoiding, let's say, or for subduing the critical reflections around technology circulate or are intertwined by four different conceptual schemes, you could say, and those are the notions of technology as progressive and technology as unstoppable, as a kind of or deterministic idea, that technology is natural and then that it's neutral. So I'll try to say something about these and kind of try to point out how they become strategies for, as it were, avoiding real serious critical reflection on the issue of technology. So I'll begin with the notion of progress. I mean, I think everybody will kind of have a kind of, let's say, intuitive understanding of what the idea of technology as something which is progressive means. And so our point here is, or my point now is that this is one of the reasons that is provided when we ask someone, or we try to, as it were, raise the question of or the need for more critical reflection around and technology, usually of course understood in exactly in the terms that, well, we have a certain kind of hegemonic direction, you could call it, that our society takes. Technology is a formative and inseparable part of that, let's say, forward-moving dynamics that our society has. That idea of progress, of course, is the notorious concept of progress. So to the extent that we are, as a culture, as a society, dedicated and understand ourselves as being a culture or civilization of progress, then technology is in that sense seen as part of that progress and that investment in life. And so especially, I mean, in terms of why technology understood simply as more or less kind of whatever kinds of technological are there seems to be this notion that, well, somehow it is progress. So of course, one of the things which, first of all, I mean, one thing or two things that we see progress and binding progress in technology is, I mean, first is the notion of scarcity. And not only of scarcity, I mean, scarcity in terms of that technique or forms of technology are needed in order to somehow satisfy certain needs that we have. Of course, here's obviously a huge discussion of what are necessary needs, what are sufficient needs, what are superfluous needs, and so on. But there's this idea, of course, that progress somehow, that there's a liberatory, that technology liberates us from work and helps in this pursuit of satisfaction. I think another important part is also our deep existential need for safety, to have techniques that provide us control and predictability and things like that, which technology in many ways does, that provides us safety. So that's of course one thing. Another thing which is particularly dominant in our modern world is the way in which technology and rationality are intertwined with each other. This goes back specifically to the 17th century theorists like Francis Bacon and Descartes, when they formulate the new program, not only for natural empirical science, but more largely for the way in which human knowledge, its relation to truth or reality, is to be established. The new, let's say, the new normative frameworks for how to establish the validity of knowledge. Technology plays in many ways a central part there. Technology in this specific sense, that knowledge and a know-how, knowledge and know-how, I mean theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge, as you could call it, become merged together, and practical knowledge is more or less defined in terms of an ability or capacity to shape and mold the natural world around us. So it has this fundamental relation to technology already. So there's this has been this idea in modernity quite much that when that we're dedicated to being rational. We think of ourselves as rational beings, I mean, specifically in the modern age, and that our, as it were, call to life is to be rational and to rationalize the world. And technology, when technology is realized, that's a form of rationality that gets realized. Now, of course, we all know that there has been a lot of critical debates around this, not the least in what we call critical theory. The Frankfurt School, for instance, as you know it from social sciences and philosophy. And the quick idea here would be we had the first waves of critical theorists, for instance, Horkheimer and Adorno, the famous critiques of modern civilization, where they see the kind of instrumental rationalization or the use of reason as an instrument for gaining power and control, that the expansion of that domain in human life and human society basically creates a decadent or kind of a destructive society, and the gas chambers of Nazi Germany are as a kind of pinnacle of that realization of reason. Now then, the later on theorists like Jürgen Habermas then formulate this notion, well, that instrumental reason is just one part of or one form of rational capacity, and if that gains too much, as it were, control over our human relations, that is, say, if rational or if instrumental rationality is too dominant, then the use of reason becomes pathological, which is then, for instance, all kinds of different. We see all kinds of different manifestations here, and then that needs to be basically complemented by other forms of reason. For Habermas, for instance, communicative reason, which stabilizes and investigates the normative frameworks for the use of reason. Now, anyway, technology, this form of critical engagement, which I think I support and applaud, but still it leaves intact the idea of technology and progress very strongly. That is to say that it might be that when technology is realized, then that is progress, but that might become pathological. So that simply needs to be, as it were, balanced by other forms of reason. So it's still progressive, but it needs to be kept non-pathological. So this is one idea of progress, and where technology as such becomes somehow where the critical reflection shifts away from the question of technology more to the way in which human reason is to be as it were realized, and usually connected with these ideas is that, well, the modern society has become in many ways, has all kinds of problems, pathologies, but on a larger scale, things have become better. Habermas would say this. Things have become better, that there is a kind of a universal normative principle in relation to which we can determine or evaluate that things have become better. And technology is part of that bettering of the world. Now we see problems with this. We can come back to that. Now the second notion, so this was progress, technology is progressive. The next step would be that philosophy is unstoppable. Now, unstoppable means something. One of the ways in which we've tried to analyze this with Thomas is to understand it as the idea that the technology is some form of learning. I mean, this is of course a notion connected to progress, that we learn something when we know how to do something. That's a form of learning. Now there's a form of and when we have learned something, the notion that we should unlearn that is more or less impossible, or something that's undesirable for one or another reason. So this is kind of idea of learning as being somehow maybe good in itself. So the critical issues which have been raised by many theorists, first of all, is that, well, we have this idea of learning, that when we know how to do something, then we have learned that, let's say we have then progressed. Well, the question of meaning, what does it mean? I mean, the normative frameworks of when something has progressed or not is of course always up for debate or for critical scrutiny. That's at least what we would want to say. And also that the idea that we have learned something and we have progressed thereby needs the whole idea that we would have a set of problems clearly defined, which is, and of course in a normative framework. I mean, which kinds of problems should we solve? That if we would have this kind of clear idea that, well, we have all the problems, and which kinds of problems is it that we need to solve, then of course the idea of if we learn something and we solve a problem, then that's progressive, and that's somehow also unstoppable, or shouldn't be stopped. But I think it's quite clear to say, I mean, you don't need much reflective thinking to understand that the whole setup is here quite vague and diffuse, because of course the question that's all the time present is the question, well, what kinds of ends are we searching for? And those ends are somehow something which is up for debate all the time. Now, so the point is here not just that we have learned things and that we cannot unlearn things. I think that it has more to do that there's this kind of underlying idea of historical determinism, and that there is idea that history has its way. History functions in a certain sense, and there's nothing we can do about that. Of course, the problem here is one thing that the whole idea of historical determinism is in many ways in contradiction with a lot of the political and social practices we have, where we take for granted that human rational decision and human autonomous rational decisions play a part in how history is defined, how things and social relations are get established. So there's this, of course, all the time this tension between the notion that something would be unstoppable, that we cannot do anything about. We have technology, and somebody says, well, we should think about it critically. Well, how can we think about it critically? And in that gesture of saying, well, we can't do anything, this is how things go, that gesture has internal to it a kind of blind spot or point of irrationality, which is in conflict with many of the practices that we de facto have and take for granted and presuppose in our self-understanding. So that there is a certain form of contradiction present, an existential contradiction, which we suggest has to do with a certain kind of way in which we want to avoid, by understanding technology as somehow unstoppable, that might be a certain kind of way, let's say a moral or psychological strategy for avoiding the existential threat, I think, which in many ways the modern scientific world would pose, is that there is a kind of a determinism here, not a historical determinism, but a kind of a natural order in which humans really don't have any say, and which we simply are more or less some kind of a set of particles flying around, and there are other laws that determine us, and we just live in an illusion that we have something like freedom and things like that. So at least the idea, the notion that technology has this kind of historical determinism gives a kind of in many ways a paradoxical twist to that thing, because on the one hand there is an acknowledgement that somehow that we are there creating that which is unstoppable. So there's this kind of blending of the notion of somehow active autonomous agency, and on the other hand something which becomes a force which we cannot stop. Anyway, I mean, the point is here to exactly show that there's something that is very fuzzy. I mean, the notions. So because even if they sound hard to grasp, it's because they are. Now, the second one is just the notion that technology is natural. More or less, the idea historically has been something leaning in many ways on the notion deeply embedded in philosophy and history of ideas in the West, that which is not natural is something which is not up for human judgment or human critical. I mean, we can describe things that are natural, but we cannot criticize it in a way. I mean, that which is natural is that which it is, and there's this assumption also in many ways that which is natural is somehow good also. It's something which a higher force, as it were, defines for us. Now, in our modern time, of course, we have the whole debate about what is natural and what is not. I mean, the post-Darwinian sense, at least, that there is a certain kind of vacuum of meaning, that is to say that the cosmos or nature as such is not defined by a normative structure, by a cosmic order, normatively organized order, but rather it has its way, and nothing is good or bad within that. And then on the other hand, talk about things being natural or not also has in many debates or discourses tendency to become quite inflicted with moralism, that is to say that we have this idea that it is good if something goes as it naturally should, then that somehow is also good, although that's the cosmological framework doesn't really supply arguments for that, also supply reasons for that. Anyway, so there is also rather kind of, I think, this kind of notion all the time there that it's somehow natural. Of course, technology in many ways is there's a fuzziness here, because technology in many ways also is a defining, or artifacts in many ways are defining for the whole culture nature divide, of course. So what is natural and what is not here? If nothing else, I mean, these are huge debates or huge questions in our self-understanding, but they are used as strategies for uncritically a strategy for legitimatizing a non-serious discourse about technology. This is our claim. Anyway, the last part here would be neutrality, which has deep roots in modern thinking. The idea that technology is neutral, that is to say that the problem is not with technology as such, but with how it's used. So let's not discuss technology, let's not thematize technology as such, let's thematize use. So that has been the central strategy. And we just wanted to point out certain issues here that don't really seem to fit well with this with this description. I think there are quite many things there, and just a quick note here is that I think that well, in many ways I think that that there are things which in our current state of ecological crisis, and also the issues of technologies such as AI and robotics, and technologies such as which intervene in biological life, the synthetic biology, gene technology, and so these are kinds of things. Of course, in many ways, raise our eyebrows in terms of is this good or bad technology? But still, I think if you look at the political discourse, usually the emphasis is on the use. So they say that, well, it's not this, the techniques in themselves are not good or bad, they just are neutral. And then, let's try to regulate their use in good ways so that the potential is there. Of course, it always blends with the idea of unstoppable, and the notion of unstoppable is usually also in political discourse used. Well, if we don't do it, the Chinese or the Russians or somebody else who has much worse value systems, so it's better that we do this, even though we might think about it in many ways as problematic. Now, the neutrality idea, I think I wanted to point out one of the basic things is that there is, of course, a certain sense in which you can think about technology as artifacts in terms of neutrality. That is to say, when you think about them as objects. So, for instance, I can think about the computer here, of course, as an object. I can put it on, I can talk with you, or I can take it and throw it through the window. I can kill somebody with it, or whatever. It's just an object in that sense. Of course, an artifact is in a very different sense, because the computer is, of course, you can always mold it into an object and do all kinds of things. But as an artifact, it's embedded in historical and social practices. So of course, it has a limited frame of teleology. It has a certain purpose with certain practices which are embedded in social and economical and power and all kinds of things. So an artifact is in a deep sense very different, categorically a different thing than an object. But it's usually, when we think about technology, or when it's used in the strategic way in order to avoid serious reflection on technology, it's used rather as this idea of something just as an object, which it is not. It's a let's say a wrong understanding of what an artifact is. And of course, the existential thing here is also that we always that technology as neutral seems to always also have this potential of kind of saying that if the idea of something being unstoppable, that there is a determinism, somehow comes with the threat of we lose in a certain sense a deep responsibility and agency in our practices. Then the notion of neutrality exactly does the reverse, by suggesting that we have uses, we have artifacts as objects, and then we have users, but it's somehow that we think of technology and artifacts as objects, as neutral objects, seems to imply that there's a certain tendency in us to want to avoid thinking seriously that the very practices involved in creating artifacts, that we're responsible for that in a much deeper sense, in the way in which it molds the very sense in which our human relations are established on a, let's call it, ontological level. The sense in which it really shapes the whole way in which how things, let's call it the structures of meaning, the horizons of meaning in our life worlds are organized in a deep way, also through artifacts in themselves, and that we bear responsibility for them. So here might be a certain kind of existential strategy also for using this. Now, the main point is not to say that. The main point is just to bring out here that technology are that in discourses of technology, I mean, we can discuss that more, that these notions are used in all kinds of different ways in order to avoid a certain, in order to hold fast this blind spot that we want to preserve somehow for us in our modern world. Which and my point here is that I think that a serious political thematization of technology goes much deeper than critical thematization on or about economy. And the task is huge, defining. I mean, it really challenges, I think, the structures of modern society, its notions of science, knowledge, all kinds of things in such a profound way that's also something which motivates existentially us not to discuss technology seriously and specifically politically. Well, I'll stop there. I think I've used up more than I should have time. But anyway, thanks.
No worries. No worries. Thank you, Niklas. Lots of interesting ideas there. We're not so strict with the time here. Pasi, just go ahead and the floor is yours this time then.
Okay, thank you. And I'll share you my screen. So can you see this now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I will be asking, did environmental education forget technological environments? And I think in many ways I continue what Niklas already elaborated. So in this presentation, I will, why should we ask the question of technology in environmental education? Next, I will present the idea of white-yellow divide as a heuristic tool to identify technological discourse. And at the end, I will review in educational literature concerning post-sustainability to see how technology is thematized. And this is an article in process, so all comments are most welcome. So first, very wide generalization about philosophy of technology. One common theme is the hiddenness of technology. And one could say that technology tends to hide its everyday presence as artifacts. Technology tends to hide its culturally determining aspects. It tends to hide its socially and ecologically extractivist metabolism. And in social context, it is often difficult to critically question technology. And so I want to know, does this also apply for environmental education? So why thematize technology in this context? Two reasons. First, the total mass of the technosphere today exceeds the mass of biosphere. And secondly, there is no evidence of sufficient decoupling of economic activity from environmental burden. In other words, there is just too much technology or matter energy throughput on Earth, and the idea of green growth or green technological leap is not going to fix that. So sustainable transition must include reconsidering how we live with technology. And this is first and foremost a cultural and educational effort. Chet Bowers was environmental and educational thinker, and he has put this in interesting way. He says, although everyday life for most people in modern society is highly dependent on a web of interlocking technologies, there are few social settings where it is possible to learn about their cultural mediating characteristics. He continues, public schools and universities, rather than the home, church, or workplace, are the logical places to learn about the connections between cultures, technologies, and local ecosystems. But then he concludes, the one place in society, that is educational institutions, where it might be possible to learn about the cultural nature of technology, other than how to promote its further development, is unable to challenge the myth that equates technological development with social progress. So if Bowers is correct, then there should be lack of a serious thematization of technology also in environmental education. Now I will present the idea of white-yellow divide, and it is from two articles, and in those articles it is asked, how do we diagnose the root cause of the environmental crisis? And these two diagnoses are called the White hypothesis of the Lynn White Jr., that says that we actually don't value nature properly, so we should reconsider our relationship to living nature. And the second hypothesis or diagnosis is that it's named after Jacques Ellul, that we are not in control of technology. So we should reconsider our connections to this technosphere. And these, in the right side, in these diagrams, it says that both weigh 1.1 teratons. It's from the recent Nature article that I cited before. So it's recent knowledge. And then in these articles, it says that both approaches are necessary, but often White hypothesis prevails, and while Ellul hypothesis is ignored. And it could be asked, why advocate respect for nature if we are not able to limit our technological power? So I'll try in this dia to present this idea maybe more clearly. So this iceberg is the environmental crisis, and in the surface level we see the destructive uses of technology, and they are countered by environmental protection. And this is all very obvious on what's happening. But as we know, icebergs are not moved by winds, but by sea currents. So there are some deeper and stronger cultural currents that are driving environmental crisis, according to this White and Ellul hypothesis. So then, according to White hypothesis, it is our deep cultural anthropocentrism that drives the environmental crisis. And as we know from the field of education today, there is a very strong countercurrent of environmental education and environmental ethics. Then, according to Ellul hypothesis, one of the deep destructive cultural currents is our unreflective sleepwalk or unreflective being with technology. And now we can ask, is there happening any serious questioning of technology or call for technological literacy in sustainable education, let's say? So this very last element here is the one that I seek to find or identify from the literature. So I made a literature review on post-sustainable discourse that is quite recent discourse in sustainability. And this diagram shows that in the inner circle, it says that I identified 50 articles elaborating post-sustainability, of which 20 were educational. And in the outer circle, there are citations of those, and it says that almost half of the citations cite the educational texts. So one could say that post-sustainable discourse is quite much an educational discourse, and that educational thinkers are quite interested in that. And generally, one can find definitions about post-sustainability. It basically underlines the environmental urgency and inadequacy of sustainable development paradigm. And it has been that we are moving into a new and much bleaker era. And in educational discourse, post-sustainability, it has been said that it calls for a fundamental rethinking of education in a rapidly changing global context. So my hypothesis was that this fundamental rethinking might also include critical questioning of technology. In other words, that there might be a stronger presence of the Ellul hypothesis. So next I will present some results, what I found in the text. First, this is the white hypothesis and how it was present in the text. It was basically, I could identify it from 15 to 20 articles, and that's 75%. And it mentions themes like human-nature relationship, modern human world, deep ecological sense, undo human-centeredness, oneness with natural world, interconnectedness, and so forth. Then I found 7 mentions that could be interpreted as Ellul hypothesis. That's 35% of all. And it says that technology distances and alienates from nature, it numbs critical consciousness, it presents metaphysics of mastery and false premise of omnipotence. It said that the built world burdens Earth. There is the planetary mass of technology. Technological optimism is dangerous. Educational institutions are uncritical. Technology is apolitical, and that technological literacy is needed. Then it was highlighted, some of the text highlighted the materiality of culture and how artifacts shape future. So here we can see that my thoughts, or the thoughts of the text that I cited, were right in this sense that the white hypothesis is present much more often than the Ellul hypothesis. But then in the middle there is a blank spot, because there was a third strong diagnosis of what keeps this environmental disaster going. And I think you might guess it already, and it is the economic critique that was present in 13 of 20 articles, and that's 65%, almost as often as the white hypothesis. And basically it says that, especially in environmental and sustainability education context, the educators are struggling with this neoliberal economic trajectory, and that it makes it impossible or difficult to prepare children for the more sustainable future. And there is criticisms of sustainable development and how it's defined by economic interest. Then market-driven, outcomes-oriented factory production, industrial efficiency curricula, and so forth, these kind of things. So then very finally, I would like to share some conclusions and thoughts. Well, first, as I said, the technology or Ellul hypothesis is indeed much less thematized. Then I was thinking, is white Ellul divide a fair or a relevant way to assess the forgetfulness of technology? So it means from this, can we somehow meaningfully compare this, or does this imbalance tell us something interesting or relevant of our educational culture? And then my last question, maybe to you, would be this, that could economic critique be interpreted as reaction against technological society? That is, should we more often be criticizing technology rather than capitalism? So with this Pac-Man picture, I could ask that should the Ellul hypothesis, that is smaller in number, should it like eat some part of the economic critique? Because as we see, for example, these terms that I picked for this picture, they are actually very much what Ellul was talking about. So this was my last question, and here I show my references. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Pasi. That was really to the point. Really interesting stuff there. At this point, I'm gonna close the recording, so you can speak freely after that if you have any questions. So I'm gonna stop the recording now.